all those speaking, ensure they switch on their microphone before addressing the meeting, and remember to switch it off when you've finished speaking. Just to note, as I was saying, the self-assessment evaluation item is now rescheduled for our December meeting, so those panel members haven't had an opportunity to comment on it, if you could please, so we can progress that in good time for December. Moving to the agenda. Oh, good evening, Councillor May. So, moving to the agenda, apologies for absence have been received from Councillor Dave Sullivan. Do members know of any other apologies for absence? I hear none. I've not been notified of any urgent business. Declarations of interest. Does any member have any personal or financial interest to declare on any items on the agenda? No? Thank you. So we now move on to the minutes, of which there are 3. So firstly, we have the minutes of the meeting of the 6th of July. We had 2 meetings in July, if you recall. So the meetings of the 6th of July which was, sorry, that's the 6th of July 2023. So I wasn't on the panel at that point, but Dr. Blackwell, you were. You're fine as a long time ago, yes. So are we happy on Susan's word to accept those minutes as a correct record from 2023? Thank you very much. Then we move to 2024, and we have the minutes of Wednesday, the 17th of July 2024 in front of us. Are people happy to accept those as a correct record? I hear no dissent, so I can sign those. And the second meeting in July was then on Monday, the 22nd of July, which was a more substantive meeting. And are people happy to accept those as a correct record? Agreed. Thank you very much. So I can sign those when I have a moment. Welcome Councillor Hyland and Damon Cook and other officers, of course, who will be presenting. So if we move on then to the substantive business of the evening, and that firstly is the annual governance statement. And that is to be, you've read, people have been circulated with the report, and obviously we can make comments on this report, which is important. We do look at it and we are happy with it. So we're going to have a presentation, I think, from Vivian Uzoechi. I hope I pronounced your name correctly. The Head of Financial Governance, Insurance and Risk. Vivian.
Thank you, Chair. So the report presents the annual governance statement, which is included in the final audited statement of accounts. The statement really is a way of the council communicating to the community, service users, taxpayers, and all parties it deals with on how the controls it has in place manages risks. It sets out the governance arrangement and framework that the council has in place and worked with for the year. So happy to take questions and comments.
Thank you, Vivian. I've certainly got a few points to raise, but open it to other members. No? Councillor Hartley.
Thank you, Chair. I just had one comment, really, which is the Chief Officer's comments are just a bit lacking in the table of principles of good governance. I just wonder whether we might request a bit of detail. We've kind of got a generic kind of officer comment, and then every other principle of good governance and sub-principle is just covered with as above. And, you know, I appreciate that some of these things kind of come around annually and are pro forma to some extent, but I think it'd be helpful to just get officer comments on each particular principle in the future. Only a minor point.
Which section, are you on Appendix A?
I'm on the governance framework, Appendix B.
Is that?
That's right. Yeah, that's right. Yeah, exactly. So there's a table here which is the officer comments, internal audit comments on each principle of good governance. And the officer comments are just a little bit perfunctory, and I think it probably might be something that we might just request a bit more detail on in the future.
Okay. Do you want to respond to that, Vivian?
I think the first thing I'll say is obviously the comment is noted and will be taken back to chief officers for consideration, and yeah, we'll take it from there.
On the item raised by Councillor Hartley, are people happy that we made that comment as a panel? Yeah, good. So my comments were more around Appendix A, actually, that I thought, and I've made exactly the same points in the annual governance statement to the other audit committees I'm involved in and got them changed, which is we don't say really what our purpose is. So it reads as very formulaic, and we don't say, so we say we're responsible for ensuring that our business is conducted in accordance with the law and proper standards. It just doesn't, and this public money is safeguarded. Well, obviously we are, but actually, what is our function? What are we about? You know, it's about promoting the social, environmental, and economic well-being of the people of Greenwich. I mean, we go longer than that, but I just think there needs to be some reference to our purpose as a council. Those are comments I've made, and I think that probably is best practice as well. Otherwise, it does read as very formulaic. It's just about governance, not about what we're. It doesn't mention what we're about, and that's under scope of responsibility, obviously. And then I just wondered, in terms, I'll leave out I was going to make a comment about being a cooperative council and in terms of engagement, but I'll leave that. But I did wonder, in terms of the governance principle and sub-principles, strong public finance. We've just focused on no recourse to public funds and medium-term financial strategy. And I wondered on what basis had we drawn. I can see the medium-term financial strategy is clearly, a big, governance principle and how that is managed and monitored and so forth. But I wondered about no recourse to public funds and why that had been, why that had been drawn out, really. Because you could highlight many areas where there are significant governance risks.
Okay, I think on the first point that you made is noted and will be taken into consideration. But the comment I'll make on that is that the SIP First Solus guidance sets out a template that basically says what needs to be captured, but the basis of that is that the information on what the council is about and what the council does should already be on the council's website. So I think there's a kind of trying to balance the information we put in, because the purpose of it is to make sure that the governance statement is succinct and it's easy for people to read and get an idea, and they could refer to the website for all the details. So it's really a case of getting a balance between how much information we put in it, but the comment is noted and will be taken into consideration as well. And then on the second point you made about the no recourse to public funds, I would have to take that back to chief officers responsible to get specific comments on why that is deemed a high-risk area, because that's not something that I'm privy to. But I think, yes, across the council, there will be various, numerous risk areas that could, you know, be deemed to be significant issues in the year, especially with the current, the challenges that nearly every council is going through. But again, it's like getting that balance on what is prioritized, but I will take that back to the relevant chief officers, if that's okay, and come back with specific response.
Yeah, if you could, I just wonder, I mean, I'm quite familiar with the no recourse to public funds, and with the Borough of Sanctuary and so forth, and it's, you know, they do a great job and it's brilliant, and they've actually done very well in managing their finances. But I wonder, you know, there are probably other areas such as the pressure on homelessness and the cost of homelessness, and the pressure on, you know, highly vulnerable children and placements for highly vulnerable children, which in governance terms are probably more significant, and certainly in financial terms more significant. So I just wondered why that one in particular had been. So if you could look at that, and perhaps if we could, if members agree, just make the comment that not you know, not for us to say which are the key areas, but to ask for what the rationale was, the choice of those, well, particularly the no recourse to public funds. I can see that media MTFS clearly is a significant governance risk. And then on the purpose, I mean, this is the issue that's been raised, as I say, in other audit committees, public sector audit committees I serve on, and generally it's been agreed that there should be some cross-reference. So there's a cross-reference in terms of our internal audit and anti-fraud, and there could be a cross-reference here to our objectives. But as a council, clearly our role is to promote the economic, environmental and social well-being of our citizens. And I think that, you know, that's only one, you know, only a few words that could be added. And then with a reference to our 19 or whatever there are objectives, that could just be a link, as I say. Yeah. Are there any other comments from members? No? Are people happy then that we move forward on the basis of those comments? Good. So on that basis, we're happy to note with those comments the report. Thank you very much for the work you've put in, Vivian. If we can then move on to the next substantive item. Oh, sorry, Councillor May.
Thank you, Chair. Will the results from that be circulated to us too? What you've asked?
Perhaps you can just go through the process from here, Vivian, of what will happen with the annual governance statement. Does it go to full council with our comments?
Yes, I believe it is part of the statement of accounts, so it will go through the natural process for approving the statement of accounts.
Thank you very much. Thank you. Okay. So that will go to full council, which generally would carry our comments. So if we can move on then to the strategic risk register, which is very well presented before us, and this again is going to be presented by Vivian. Over to you again.
Thank you, Chair. Yeah, so the strategic risk register basically contains the key risks that threaten the council's plans and strategies. It sets out the controls that the council has in place, the mitigating actions, responsibilities for the risks. It it covers risks across the entire council as opposed to just one service or departmental area. And it gives, one of the other things that we've introduced in the strategic risk register to point out is that it now directly links to the specific missions, the council missions in place, and which risks apply to those. And yes, I'm happy to take any questions on that.
And would you like to, before I move to Councillor Hartley, highlight what you feel the most significant risks are and any major trends since it was last presented?
I think the most significant risk, I'd say, is around finances, and that's the most significant risk for nearly all councils across the country. I think most things link to finances when you think about it, so really that is the top on every local authority's agenda, and of course the council as well. In terms of trends, there's also one new risk, I'd add as well, around the new procurement law that is coming into place. And trends in terms of assessments, assessments have pretty much been similar to the last report on risk, bar one, which is the demand for school places, where the assessment's slightly higher than it was last time.
Thank you very much. Councillor Hartley.
Thank you, Chair. Thank you for introducing the report. I've just got a question on the report and then a comment on the risk register itself. The report says that at 4.6, an external review of the new risk management toolkit and strategic risk register is being carried out by Danny Wong, founder and CEO of Goat Risk Solutions. And I just wondered what conflict arrangements have been put in place. Goat being one provider of risk management software system. I'm all for getting external expertise in, and I'm sure he's very well qualified to conduct the review, but could you just speak to the potential conflict of interest point?
Okay, the assessment that he's undertaken for us, really, Danny Wong provides the system where we record risks. The assessment that he's provided for us is around the toolkit. I think the last meeting we had where the risk registers were presented, I think you may recall that there were questions around whether the toolkit aligned with ISO guidance and all of that. So really the work he's doing is not necessarily around the system, which is where the conflict will be, but it's around whether the process that we've put in place aligns with risk management guidance and standards, and also how we capture risk and how we present the report. So the information we have on our risk register, if it's sufficient or we need to put more to make it more easier for people to understand. But yes, the issue of a potential conflict was there. But really, for what he was doing for us, I think we kind of managed, and he did acknowledge that there is a potential conflict because he provides, or his company provides the system in place.
Okay, so it's an external review, but we acknowledge that it's not independent and it's within the context of the use of the system that we have.
I would say yes. Yeah.
Okay,
I'd leave it at that.
Thank you. And then a comment on the strategic risk register. Something, as you said in your introduction, obviously these risks are across the whole council. And I just wanted to pull out one as an example where I think that intention hasn't necessarily translated into reality. So the risk that is around impact of government welfare changes. this is, I think, an example where that is a risk that affects the whole, lots of different areas of the council. Because the risk is owned by so this is risk 12, government welfare legislation, impact on service delivery. I just was interested to note that all of the controls and actions in that risk relate to housing. And that risk is owned by the Director of Housing. But that is an example of a risk that goes far beyond housing. And so I just wanted to flag that as an example of where I think that there's still some work to do to make sure that these risks and the controls that are being presented are holistic across the whole council. And another one, which I think there is a risk of that happening, is achieving net zero. So I've made the point before that I think because that is so particularly cross-cutting, it would make more sense for me for that risk to be owned by the Chief Executive because it is so fundamental. It's instead owned by a director, and I just think as a panel chair, we need to be really alive to the potential for these risks to be looked at in silos as opposed to across the whole council. I hope I've expressed that clearly enough. Could you perhaps comment on that example about welfare changes and whether you agree with that comment?
Yeah, so I think one of the things about the way the council looks at risks and the strategic risk register, it kind of starts off from the way the council is structured and the council's constitution, where responsibilities for risk areas are designated to specific directorates and specific directors. So the constitution places overall responsibility with the directors, who would then work with other directors and other colleagues across the entire council around that risk. So our risk management process kind of mirrors the council structure and how it works. And so you would see a risk like the one that you've mentioned around with housing. It is under the Director of Housing's responsibility because that is where the risk sits in the council, but he does interact with other, and then also the risk register, strategic risk register, is scrutinized and agreed by GMT, which is a collective of all directors and the chief exec as well. And all of the risks are, to an extent, cross-cutting, to an extent, very, very important, but they can't all be owned by, say, the chief exec, for instance, because that will be going against how the council itself is structured.
Sure, thank you. Just a follow-up, Chair, if I may. So I understand that's the intention. I just think that that's an example of where that's not working as intended. So, to take that risk 12, I think what you've said is the process, the intention is that the owner looks at the risk holistically across the council. It may be owned by one director or one individual, but that individual is liaising with others across the organisation, across GMT, to give a holistic set of actions. So this risk about the impact on service delivery of government welfare legislation, it's a very good and comprehensive set of actions around the housing element of that, which is the risk owner's brief. But that risk goes far beyond housing to finance and income collection, council tax collection, for example, to a whole, I think it would be one of those cross-cutting risks that touches most departments across the council. And I can't see any evidence here that liaising across departments, directorates has taken place. So I suppose the follow-up question is who polices that process? Who is making sure that the risk owners are liaising with their colleagues across GMT? Is it just left to GMT to police that, or is there any other mechanism? And if not, could that perhaps be looked at and this example taken away?
Yeah, I think with the risks and how departments manage that, obviously it will be for the Director of Housing to give a more specific response, but I can only comment generally on the principles, and that would follow the relevant processes that the department has in place. And in terms of policing the management of the risks, there are other committees, for instance, that these issues will be reported. So all the stuff, all the risks in the risk register, I think to one extent would also be reported to other committees like the scrutiny committee and other committees around the issues that you've raised. So there is also that running alongside the actual register that sits there. So I think I definitely believe and know that there are processes in place to make sure that happens and to make sure that it's policed and scrutinized and challenged. But that can all be covered under the risk register. But I will take the comments back as well.
Thank you. And perhaps the next time we see the strategic risk register as a panel, we might, as panel members, be alive to that. And perhaps that's something we could play a role in helping with that by checking that next time we see it, it's perhaps more holistic, Chair, as a suggestion.
Thank you very much, Councillor Hartley. Was it on this point or a different point? On this point. Councillor Williams.
So it was actually building on Councillor Hartley's observations, which I do agree with, and it brings me to reference 7 on there, where the Assistant Chief Executive is the risk owner of something that is cross-cutting. So it kind of flies in the face of each directorate owning it. So I wondered, is there more of a role for the Assistant Chief Executive playing the ownership of some of these rather than Chief Executive themselves? I just wondered how that one ended up there rather than with, say, the Director of Finance, if it's procurement related. Thank you.
The procurement team, I believe at the moment, sits under the Assistant Chief Exec. And that's why it's his title on there.
Just to come back, if I may, Chair, that does seem more cross-cutting, doesn't it, a role like that, rather than having a kind of a very focused silo approach, which we know from the recent peer review has been criticised in how that silo works. I do share Councillor Hartley's concerns on that particular one, I think. So I wondered, particularly with carbon neutral, that is so cross-cutting to lie with just DRES, that would seem to be at almost a Chief Exec, Assistant Chief Exec level, and I wonder, again, is there a recommendation we can make that that's looked at in terms of who actually owns these risks? Because I can't see how the buck can stop with a risk owner when they're not in full control of all of the associated risks.
Yeah, I must say that I agree with those points, particularly on carbon neutral. I can see that obviously the strategic risk register has to be owned by the council corporately and the whole senior leadership team, but you want specific leads with directors taking responsibility for particular risks. But carbon neutral in particular, and the finance one, I'd have thought should be owned by, I mean, everyone should feel some sense of ownership of that, rather than saying, well, that's just a matter for DRES. Because if you look at carbon neutral, it's about, much of it is around housing, and much of it is around transport as well, which are different directorates from the directorate that has the responsibility. So it is very much a corporate risk that we won't meet our 2030 target. And therefore, I think that we do need to take on board those points.
Yes, I'll definitely take the comments back to GMT, but just to say again that the risk register is owned by GMT, which is all of the directors and the chief exec in one room, and you know the responsible risk owners are just the lead officers, so to speak, for each specific risk. But in terms of ownership, it is all the directors across the council and the chief exec.
Dr. Blackwell.
Yeah, just in connection with that whole thing, it might be helpful in the document for people who are coming from outside that context, who are not councillors and don't really know about the structure. It might be helpful, just even if it's a general point at the start of the report, to say something about how that process works in general, and how in principle and through the structure it aims to be holistic, so that obviously we need to know more in each case, but at least people coming at it cold from outside would have some understanding of why and how well it works through this structure. like just a general statement at the beginning, I think would be helpful.
Thanks. So I think that's one clear area that we'd like to see more focus on responsibility. And I was just going to ask, and I wasn't on the panel when you were looking at the revamped strategic risk register, and I can see that we have got the matrix I'm used to is what is the how high is a risk and what is the impact of that risk, so the likelihood and the impact, which you've got this matrix within Appendix B, but it's quite difficult to delineate. You can see that one is the highest at 16. Is it 16? I think so, or 20. Yeah. No, well, I'm looking at the mitigated risk rather than the gross risk. And you can see that 2, school-placed planning, is somewhere, and then 3, 5, 6, and 7 are fairly high as well. But it's not, I'm normally used to a table which has those scores alongside the narrative, rather than being separate from the narrative. So you can see, and also an aggregate then, so you can see how your overall risk rating is hopefully reducing over time. And we can keep an eye on that. So what we can't see in this is what the aggregate position is. And we have to, it's difficult to, you can bring together B and A and do some work on it, but I just wonder whether we could put the numbers, well, the numbers are in fact in 12, 20, 25, yeah, but they're not disaggregated. So the numbers in the colours on Appendix A are just the multiples, not the denominators. And I wondered if that could be disaggregated so we could see for each item in Appendix A what the likelihood and what the impact is for the mitigated risk.
Okay, just so I'm clear on what you're saying, is it something similar to what we have in Appendix C that you're talking about, where you've got the 5 by 5 matrix and, okay.
Rather than having to cross-reference from one appendix to another appendix, it's all within one table.
Okay, yeah, I think one of the easiest way we have that is if we use a spreadsheet where we could manually put that in. But when we look at risk management systems, they all tend to produce a kind of bespoke report that you can't really alter that much. I think the closest we've got on here on Appendix A is at the end of just below where it's got effect on the first column that says details. It kind of gives you the risk assessment underneath each. I think that's the closest we have. So we'll look at how we can get something close to what you've requested.
It's purely so we can see, say on finance, which is risk number 1, where the likelihood is is 4 and the impact clearly is 5, the highest impact. Then we can see that we've reached 20, which is the grey thing on my colour copy here online. That we can see that 20 is 4 by 5, which we can't see in Table A. So that would be helpful. Though clearly we can see it's red. Other than that, I think it's a good thing. Just on school place planning, my understanding is there is a critical risk in terms of SEND, which is why we're looking to open a new special needs school in Kidbrooke Park. But the elsewhere among the general admissions, that there is some there are lots of spare capacity, and the pressure will be that schools are therefore in financial difficulties because they're having to close classes and so forth, because their numbers are falling, because the roles are going post-pandemic, demographically, the roles seem to be going down slightly. So there's sort of different pressures. And I wonder if those are two risks rather than one risk, because they're sort of going in opposite directions. Have I read that right?
Okay, I'm looking at, just to be sure I've got the right risk here, I'm looking at risk number 2, which is demand for school places. And is that what you're referring to?
Yeah, yes.
Yeah, I think I would have to take that back to the relevant chief officer to give the response or the answer to that question, unfortunately, because I won't be able to answer that.
Okay, I mean, it seems that the narrative here is very much around SEND and special needs education. We know there's huge intensive pressure there just when we go to schools, and that's why we're opening a new one. But we've got the opposite problem in many other schools, that they can't fill their places and nurseries are closing and so forth. So I just wonder whether they're two very different risks. But yeah, okay. And therefore calling it school place planning, perhaps in the demand for school places, is a bit all-encompassing, for the main risk there being SEN school places. Although obviously you can be an SEN and in mainstream, so it is special school. Damon, did you want to comment on this?
Yeah, I was just moving over to the third column on that particular appendix, which talks about, if you look at the actions there, to start development and implementation of a whole system approach to falling roles and demand for SEN provision. So, I mean, basically, I think that picks up I totally get the fact that there are two things going on, but I think that's actually saying we're looking at this in a whole system approach.
Well, thank you very much. Now, do any other members have comments on this? Councillor May.
Thank you, Chair. I was going to suggest, I don't know whether it be possible, because these are, I take it, are things that are run and then they produce the report with the information that you input. Is that correct? Yeah? So could we not still have this as a report, running alongside it, the spreadsheet where you said that there'd have to be input?
We don't use the spreadsheets anymore, so that was one of the challenges that we try to address, because using a spreadsheet is quite resource intensive, and sometimes it goes into numerous pages and columns that you can't fit into a page. So the recommendations from, I think, a few years ago was to try and move to a system that could capture everything in a succinct way. And I know that other colleagues from other councils are also moving away from spreadsheets, because even external auditors are picking that up as one of the issues because of human errors when you're updating, copying and pasting, if you've got formulas in. And it's almost impossible to put together a risk matrix on a spreadsheet. You've got to manually color, drag and drop little objects to make that. So that's a challenge or the difficulty that we have, really.
Perhaps I used the wrong expression, because I know the spreadsheet just goes on and on, like you say. But you said perhaps have something running alongside it that could be there. That's just a suggestion.
Thank you. I mean, I think I think it's quite a good format. I think it would just be useful, as I said before, to have some clarity in terms of the bringing together that grid, and have some clarity as to what makes up how the multiple is derived from the likelihood and the impact. enumerators. Okay. Right. I was going to perhaps just make a small point on risk 1, which clearly is the highest risk, that we say the cause insufficient government funding combined with, but isn't there also a risk a cause could be our inability to collect sufficient revenue, be that parking income or moving traffic contraventions or other revenues as well? It's not just government funding, it could be council tax. We're very good at collecting council tax and business rates, but it is obviously increasing demand-led services, but also a cause could be the undershooting anticipated revenues rather.
Since I'm here, I suppose I better take that one. There's almost like a decreasing cascade of risks that you can put in this bucket. This is by far the biggest one, the one that's been identified. It is the government funding side of things. And to bear in mind that the government funding, when we talk about government funding, we bring in the definition of like the settlement funding assessment, and within that is actually council tax itself. So the framework for levying council tax and how much you can raise it by, etc., all falls within that overarching bucket. There will be other risks around, collecting fees and charges and what have you, but they are much, much lesser in the grand scheme of things.
Okay, I just raised the point. I didn't want to press it, so thank you very much for that. That's helpful. So maybe we could say insufficient government funding and or ability to raise other revenues, which would be the cap on council tax and so forth. Yeah. Okay. Good. Are there no further comments? Are people with the points made initially by Councillors Hartley and Williams, they happy to note this report? Thank you very much. So we move on then to item 7. Thank you, Vivian. Internal audit and anti-fraud performance report from April till June. And welcome Jess, Mr. Fear, and if you'd like to present. Thank you.
Yes, so this is a standard quarterly report in relation to the delivery of internal audit plan of the year 24-25 and the anti-fraud work undertaken by internal audit. There are a few points I would like to draw members' attention to. We are slightly below schedule in respect of the audit plan with 22%. The expected was 25%. But it's not unusual to certainly start of the plan year to be slightly below, and there's no concern about that. There were no limited assurance review in that first quarter, but I can say that there will be at least 2 to be reported in quarter 2. Page 5 of the report details the audit client feedback questionnaires returns, and the score was 4.5 out of 5, which is pleasing. So we're still performing quite well. And on page 11, that details that the London Borough Bromley partnership will continue in its current format to the end of the financial year. London Borough Bromley have recently advised they have chosen to exercise their option to extend the anti-fraud partnership to the end of March 26. I'm happy to take any questions.
Well, thank you very much, Jess, and congratulations on the continuation of the Bromley contract, a feather in our cap. Questions from members on this report? Councillor Williams.
Just a brief one, really. In terms of resource, do you have any vacancies at the moment, or are you fully staffed and happy, or are you affected by staff shortages as well?
During quarter one, we had short staffed and we had vacancies. We have recruited, and 2 new starters have started just by the beginning of September. Unfortunately, we have then had some loss of audit resources again, so we'll be looking to see if we can then fill that gap. But we would really hope to increase the audit resource over the year.
Councillor Hartley.
Thank you, Chair. Thank you. Whenever we see these reports, it always provides us a useful summary of housing benefit fraud and subletting investigations. Do we have comparator data for that? I'm not sure I've ever seen how Greenwich, what the situation in Greenwich is compared to other boroughs, and if that's available, could that perhaps be shared?
Thank you for your question, Councillor. I will have to go back to the fraud manager and Brendan Costello to ask about if they do any benchmarking exercises. Sorry.
Any further questions from members? Are you at liberty to say what are the 2 areas that you're looking at the moment, or where there could be limited insurance, or are you not at liberty to say that yet because you haven't finalised the work?
We haven't finalised the work fully. It is expected, so I would rather not go on that.
Well, and presumably then that will be reported to our December meeting, our next meeting. Well, certainly I can see this. I mean, some concern was expressed, I remember, at our first July meeting when we had the previous report about us being quite a way behind because of capacity and staffing issues, and we do seem to have caught up and nearly on target now. So many thanks to you and the team for the work that you've done in bringing us back on target in terms of our internal audit, which continues to be a very well respected service. So thank you, Jess. We have another item on internal audit charter. Oh, sorry, I should just ask members if you're happy to note the report on internal audit. Noted, thank you. The internal audit charter for 24-25. So over to you again, Jess.
Thank you, Chair. Yeah, the report sets out the annual review or revision of the internal audit charter. The charter sets out the scope and purpose of the internal audit and is a requirement of the public sector internal audit standards that we have a charter in place and that members are presented with this charter to note it, and it's been signed, if it's agreed, by the chair, the chief executive, director of finance, and the head of internal audit. There's been no changes to the charter this year from last year, as there has been no changes in the legislation or the procedures by which internal audit performs.
Thank you. Are there any questions from members? So my only question, it may be covered, is we had the discussion at the first July meeting, and I had a discussion with the head of internal audit, Brendan, in relation to a tracker of the recommendations, management recommendations for at least for limited assurance audits. And hopefully that will come before us at some point, so we can see how they're being implemented or why they have not been implemented, if there may be good reasons for not implementing them. But I wondered if that was something that we could put into the charter at all, in terms of within the reporting section.
Thank you, Chair. Yes, we are currently looking at ways to present the tracker information that we have in a sort of easy access way for you to read. And we will update the charter once that's in place, together with our internal procedures and policies.
Thank you very much. No further points from members? People happy to note this then? Thank you very much for the work you've done on this, Jess. And I think that now concludes the panel meeting for this evening. So look forward to seeing members in December. And may see many of you before.